Crime and punishment. Crime and punishment. Crime and punishment. Why do people commit crimes? Which terrifying punishment did France abolish in the 20th century? How do you allegedly identify a witch? And why wouldn't you let Mike anywhere near your helicopter? All of this and much more feature in this video. So hello fellas.
Well, go on, my G. To instill discipline, as they say in South Park, you rack a discipline.
You lack a discipline!
No, but the whole point of punishment in terms of a legal thing is obviously to force the concurrent to stop others doing the same thing. 9 times out of 10 it doesn't really do anything, but hey, you murder someone just brutally enough, you might actually stop someone from doing a crime.
I mean, it did technically work in the film The Mummy, the Brendan Fraser one. I mean, no one else tried to kill the pharaoh after they did all those live mummifications.
Right.
So they tend to have sort of 6 recognised sort of aims of punishment. So you mentioned one of them, Brock, which is a deterrence, which, quote, a punishment to put off people committing crime. And then you have, quote, protection, which they describe as a punishment which should protect society from the criminal and the criminal from themselves. The third one that they have is called reformation, which, quote, is punishment should reform the criminal. And the next one after that you have retribution, which, quote, punishment should make the criminal pay for what they've done wrong. Certain kind of, the next one, you might have heard this word before because certain people like to mention this word. The word reparation, which the definition of that is sort of a punishment to compensate the victim or victims of a specific crime. And then the sort of last one they have is, they call it vindication, which is, the definition for that is, the punishment should make sure that the law is respected.
Beer money.
Well, you know, sometimes you just get bored.
No, there's all sorts of different reasons. There's many reasons making a crime as there are people on the planet. You know, everyone is very individual when it comes to crime committance. You know, sometimes there's a straight reason, sometimes it's a deeply psychological thing. So it's always a little difficult to tell unless you actually ask the person why they did it. And even then they might go, I don't know, I just felt like it.
But there is sort of a general sort of agreement on how people become, quote, criminals. Sort of criminal behaviour sort of fits into one or more, or the one of this certain kind of following category. So the first one could be sort of criminal behaviour could be caused by a person's free choice. The second one is criminal behaviour can be caused by a person's environment. An example being a broken home, a failure at school, just a few examples which could become sort of a catalyst to a person becoming a criminal. Criminal behaviour can seem like the only option for a person if they're unable to sort of conform to a society's rules. And the sort of last one could be criminal behaviour can be developed being associated with other people that might be criminals.
Yes and no, but I always put it down to the joke philosophy. You know, all it takes is one bad day. You know, and it just spirals from there. You know, people have a tendency to either fall upwards or fall downwards, you know, pretty consistently at points. So, you know, I can understand the logic of, you know, you do something to defend yourself and all of a sudden it's just, yeah, now I'm just doing criminality for, you know, reasons. Some psychologists might argue with you and go, people have a propensity for crime, you know, because what if your dad was a criminal, you're a criminal too?
Yeah, kind of like the Death Wish movies. He didn't choose to kill those people, they just chose to kill his family. It was a trade-off.
That's a sort of a revenge kind of plot though.
Yeah, for like, he has really bad luck with relationships. Women always seem to get murdered by the start of one film, and then, you know, it just keeps going and going, him just going around, just Charles Bronson killing people, that's pretty much it.
So, for example, of our previous ones, so sort of your deterrence, protection, reformation, retribution, reparation, vindication, which sort of punishment would you think fit those kind of crimes?
It's down to individuals because religion, gender, you know, if the person has a personal involvement, obviously the punishment is, you know, determinant more on how they feel as opposed to, you know, how it should be objectively. You know, like theft in this country you'd probably just go to prison for a couple of months. You know, theft in other countries just sees your hands get chopped off. So again, it's subjective.
I know what that they chop off the hand that you wouldn't use to wipe your backside. So.
So sort of in general, prison you tend to get there for either deterrence, protection, or a reformation. The next one on the list is
because they're going to keep you safe in the showers.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever gone to prison, you know, for the concept of protection, given that, you know, gangs.
I think when it says in protection and fairness, I think that's the protection for the general public rather than the person.
Okay, fair enough, obviously. But I mean, even then, that's situational.
Fairness, you don't really want serial killers out on the loose. You kind of want them in a secure prison. Or the next one is electronic tagging, so which would fit into sort of your deterrence and sort of protection category. So
I'd say that's more of a slap on the wrist than a deterrent. Because if you're on tag, it means you've been released.
Yeah, and then
they just want to keep an eye on you. But if you've got an ASBO, you're banned from going to certain areas. But it's only really effective if somebody knows that you have an ASBO and calls the police. And if they bother to show up because they're not busy.
Fines, which would be sort of put into the retribution/reparation category. So moving on, next one, community service, which they classify as reformation and retribution.
It's dependent, but I mean, again, it's one of those things I've never really thought it works all that much. I mean, for some people it works. For the majority, I think it's just, oh, well, you know, I've just got to do it and get it out of the way, and then I'm free to do whatever the hell I want again.
Capital punishment, which would cover the sort of category as protection/deterrence.
Capital punishment, again, it's dependent because some criminals just don't reform. It doesn't matter how much you punish them. You know, once they're
yeah, but they'll scare others.
Yeah, but, you know, if all you're going to go with is fear, once people overcome fear, you know, what's to stop them just doing what they want anyway?
I think the only issue with sort of capital punishment is we used to have it in this country, but I think it was the 1967 or something that they outlawed it, which I think one of the reasons why is law enforcement aren't perfect, they will make mistakes, it's sort of human error. So within reason, they have in the past done a murder investigation and they thought they got the bloke, he got hung at the neck and stuff, dead, blah blah blah, and then they reopened the investigation like 5 or 6 years later and they clock, oh yeah, we killed the wrong bloke.
To be fair though, doing it nowadays would be a little more different because obviously back then they didn't have forensic technology to do the checking, whereas now you'd rely a lot more on that. So I mean, it's situational.
There is a bit of an issue with that. Can't remember what the podcast was called, but it was about people who got wrongly convicted of crime, and this guy got blamed by the whole community because his house burned down, and the guy who'd written the book on house fires had never actually done any real research. So like the windows had all cracked like a spider pattern. He claimed it was because like an accelerant like petrol or something had been used, and it turns out that's just how glass breaks, and they executed this guy that was completely innocent for apparently murdering his family, which he hadn't done. So yeah, they can still be completely fucking wrong.
Yeah, there's a necessity for actual checks and balances. This is why, you know, you've really got to be sure with capital punishment. You can't just go around going, yeah, kill him, hang him, shoot him, take him out by the sand dune bunker and shoot him in the knees and the back. You know, you've really got to be sure. I think the Americans kind of have a good system of death row, but even then death row is situational.
I think capital punishment works if you've got the right person and it's the most serious the crimes. Like if you have absolute concrete evidence, which realistically 9 times out of 10 you might do, it can work, but realistically it's not going to be perfect, which is why I'm glad this country did abolish it in the 60s, because multiple times they have got it wrong and people have died innocent people have died when they shouldn't have had to.
I know that the French were still chopping people's heads off with the guillotine till like 1952. So.
To be fair, Christopher Lee literally saw the last guillotine execution.
Well, they're still using the guillotine in the 50s. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the French love the guillotine.
I just assumed that they stopped doing that like when it got to the 1800s.
No. guillotine executions to like into, I think it was into the 70s.
Probation, which comes in sort of the categories of reform/vindication.
In terms of reforming criminals, well, I say reforming is a strong word. I suppose it is appropriate though, but I mean, sometimes it works, but again, it's like any sort of psychological thing. You know, people do have tendencies to slip if, you know, you're not really careful with them. So obviously you have to put them in I'd say not put them in situations, but make sure, you know they have a support system to prevent them slipping back if they feel like they might. So obviously, you know, having someone to talk to helps.
Sort of how has crime and punishment changed through history? Sort of our first period is sort of the Anglo-Saxon period. So the Anglo-Saxon period, sort of kings made the laws, and then they sort of decided what penalties to give out for what sort of crimes and stuff, and they sort of had the duty to keep the peace, and people called nobles, they sort of assisted the king in keeping whatever law they've decided. So sort of certain kind of crimes you had in this period sort of included crimes against the person, crimes against property, and crimes against authority.
You know, kings and queens had, you know, God's divine rights, you know, so when they came up with laws, you know, it wasn't necessarily always to the benefit of people, more so themselves and, you know, their close associates.
So they say community had to take responsibility in upholding some law. So people were divided into, quote, tithings, I think it's pronounced, which would be sort of a group of 10 men who monitored each other, and if one broke the law, the others would bring him to court to be punished. So it goes on. So a local official, brackets the reeve, would then carry out this decision made out by local court. So which is interesting. And then there's a bit after this which says if a victim raised the human cry by calling out, sort of a whole village had to track said person down who committed what crime it was. And if the villagers didn't do this, they would be fined.
I realised they had mass virginity back in the era of ye old England. Yeah, but the problem.
They were lucky.
Yeah, the problem with mob justice is and it's always been the problem, is it's mob justice. You know, it's not exactly done with being objective. It's not like, oh, we're going to bring you back and we're just going to punish you, you know, how we're meant to. No. You ran away! You betrayed us! You did this! You did that! No, they get into a frenzy, so, you know, I don't think it was a great idea, objectively.
It's not very specific, but the human cry, could it be literally any minor thing? Like, if someone takes, like, your chair or something, could you summon the human cry, or would it have to be something really sort of...
It's an excellent question. No, I imagine it was for probably medium to serious crimes, but I don't imagine they were going to do it when you stole a loaf of bread.
I think they would have back then.
Actually, you know what, you're right.
You understand, like, that's like food. Sometimes, depending on how poor people are, that could be the only meal that they get all day. It's like, yeah, we're gonna fucking kill you for that.
Trial by jury was first used in this sort of period.
It needs to be 10 random. It needs to be randomly selected people, like regardless of whichever era of history you're in.
It also needs to be a fair group of people. They can't have like prejudice against the
individual involved.
The victim and the criminal. They can't have prejudice against either of them. Otherwise, everything's just screwed.
So sort of how it would work in this period. Sort of both sides would present their evidence before the jury, before obviously the jury reached a verdict. It also says you could take an oath by calling on God as your witness, and then local witnesses were sort of allowed to be called for this.
Back when, like, your method of proving you were innocent of a crime was you'd hold a red hot iron. If you were innocent, your hand wouldn't be burnt.
But they also apparently had trial by cold water, which the accused person was put into water. If they floated, they were guilty as the water apparently rejected them. But if they sunk, pure and therefore innocent, and they would also drown, so it'd be really pointless.
You gotta love common sense, really.
A lot of these do sound like someone in a pub made up a lot of these. I just thought, yeah, what could go wrong with this? So you have the stocks, which were obviously for your legs, and something called the pillories, which were for arms. So this is sort of your pillories, which is your arms, and this chap obviously doesn't look very happy about being in it. So then this would be sort of your stocks, which they've given a nice cheat, and I don't know why this lady has a sausage here.
Have
is it this too? I don't know, that's really funny.
That looks really comfy.
Yeah, just me and my mate here, Roger, just chilling in some forest for some reason. This guy just got his hands on his hip. He's like, I'm not overly impressed.
Have they cropped out the woman in the mask?
Yeah, she's there in the corner.
Throw anything to you if you're in the stock. I remember being told that in history in school it'd be rocks, rotten fruit, never fresh because that'd be a waste. Oh shit, camp all kinds of stuff.
Corporal punishment, which in brackets has physical punishment next to it. So apparently this is stuff like mutilation, the sort of removing sort of a foot or an eye, which is meant as a deterrent to other people for committing crimes. Of the Middle Ages, so sort of the new crimes in this period, which were forest laws, which would be if you hunted in the king's forest, it was now a crime, which nowadays would be classified as poaching, which people needed a permit to hunt, which would be difficult to sort of obtain. Apparently another one is it became illegal for peasants to leave a lord's land to go somewhere else.
Your life, your ass, your entire being belongs to your lord. If you offend your lord, be prepared to commit Sudoku.
Actually, the next one is slander, which we obviously still have nowadays, make false claims about other people.
I'm wondering who slept with someone's wife and then that started spreading round, and it's like, oh, I'm going to make a law about that.
Slander is subjective because some people will go calling them a cunt or a liar isn't slander, but other people go, yeah, that's blatantly slander. In fact, that's like double slander.
Sort of in this period as well, you sort of had a rise in outlaws, sort of anyone who would flee justice. So it's sort of if you committed a crime and then left the area, then you'd be sort of be considered a sort of fugitive.
Here comes the dog, the big dog, the bounty hunter.
Trial by combat.
Be base.
Bring it back. I think it should come back. It'd be fun. Really, instead of being like in, two people fighting, like, you have to do up a car, so like you have a rape to the death sort of situation. I think that'd be it. How much money would the justice system make then as well? So.
I mean, back then, Trial by combat, didn't. Well, it made sense because if you knew you were going to get screwed over by the king and his merry men, then that was your one out.
Yeah, that's true. At least that way you don't get, tortured to death.
Period as well. You obviously had Guy Fawkes who decided he didn't really like the king and tried to blow up Parliament with him there, and then obviously didn't succeed and ended up getting sort of hung, drawn and quartered, which is fun.
It's a shame they did that to your ancestor, really.
Yeah.
This guy.
Justice for big lad Guy Fawkes, he was clearly framed. It was clearly
Josh's many times great-grandfather. You can have the second two happen, but the hung one is kind of a natural genetics thing, so
for God's sake.
No, hung, drawn and quartered always sort of reminds me of like Mortal Kombat fatalities, and I don't know why.
Witchcraft. Due to sort of a lack of scientific knowledge and sort of religious hatred, Henry VIII passed the Witchcraft Act that sort of made witchcraft punishable by death, and sort of Elizabeth, I think it's the first, eased this with a law, set a law that only witchcraft that caused death had the death penalty. But her successor, James I, believed in witches and passed a law called the Witchcraft and Conjuration Act in 1684 that sort of gave the death penalty to anyone summoning evil spirits. And sort of the hysteria sort of got worse with the witch finder Matthew Hopkins, who used tricks to find sort of witches with the Enlightenment. And sort of this hysteria did eventually sort of end by 1700. So.
It's just I think at that point, a lot of the guys in the church were just so hateful of women that just went, yeah, you know what? Any woman who speaks out, witch. White sheets in Tudor England, witch.
She has a nose ring,
witch.
Kim Kardashian's ass is fake, witch. This woman didn't go out with me, witch.
Do we know anything about Matthew Hopkins other than that he apparently hated all the women?
He was also a massive turbo virgin. I don't know all that much about him actually. I've heard of him, but it's not really covered on the curriculums in English schools because
yeah, they kind of gloss over it.
Yeah, it's just sort of very brief.
Actually,
he looks like a nom.
Now, I'm getting the word nonce.
Yeah, he does look like a massive sort of... Yeah.
Oh, he's definitely touched someone's kid.
It looks like a woman rejected a book and then immediately just decided that every woman is scum.
Oh, she looked like he never even got close to a woman, apart from when he was burning them alive.
Him and his new gear, hello.
He looks like his mom would reject him.
Man's got shoes like that, which... that
That's
drawing,
what
that's a grabby hand. That's the molesty hand. That's the man who pinches all your fruit and veg.
Although torture was normally unlawful, and Hopkins used techniques such as sleep deprivation to extract confessions from his victim, which...
In let him sleep, because obviously when you hit X point, you become zombie-like. So, it's just very
which is
difficult.
flawed, because obviously anyone without any sleep is just gonna...
Yeah, and if you don't sleep for a certain amount of time, you die anyway.
So he would also cut the arm of the accused with a blunt knife. And if she didn't believe, she was said to be a witch, which, again, this guy's masochist. Hopkins and his assistant often looked for the devil's mark, and they
I think we all know where the devil's mark was placed.
this mark that all witches and sorcerers were thought to possess, that was said to be dead to all feeling and would not bleed. So that's essentially what they're saying is anyone with a mole, a birthmark, or an extra nipple, or I'm assuming an extra breath, I'm assuming would be the suspected witch or whatever. It's not. Vagabondage is due to a rising population and a lack of jobs. There was a rise in vagabonds.
But doesn't that mean homeless?
I think so. So sort of poor, sometimes beggars would sort of travel from town to town, sort of obviously asking for money, and they made an act called the Vagrancy Act of 1547, which obviously made it illegal to beg.
I can kind of understand it, because, where are you getting the food from, though? Especially back then.
So sort of next on this list is moral crimes. Obviously at the end of the English Civil War, which I think was at Charles I law, sort of you had sort of the Puritan government which took over, and pretty much anything that was normal essentially got made a crime. So
Christmas, illegal,
Yeah.
burn the witch.
it's just stuff like attending sports on a Sunday, illegal, drinking alcohol, illegal, celebrating Christmas, illegal. If I had that logic, just anything he doesn't like, he just makes a crime.
I wonder what this reminds me of.
So this one here, obviously, yeah, he looks like he just hates anyone with a pulse. This one here, he's had no joy in life.
This strikes me as the kind of man who is very, very religious. He's the hardcore religious nerd. Like nothing gets past him.
It looks like he just needs a joint, if anything. Just
Cromwell with shades is hilarious. Well, I mean, the argument is, regardless if you like him historically or not, you can't doubt his ability as an effective leader.
Sort of transportation, obviously you sent your criminals to do hard labour in America when we used to own it, and then we sent them off later to Australia, sort of help build the new colony, and most of them were unlikely to afford to come back after the sentence was served. So a lot of them obviously died on the voyage there, the harsh conditions that were in sort of this new colonies in sort of the British Empire.
get back. Could really do with like a free holiday. Get back. I'll go break a law, right? They can send me off to Australia for like 2 or 3 years. I'll be fine with that. I can get a tan. I can still record this through the internet. It's all good.
What crime have you committed to get sent off to the transportation?
I got caught drawing a penis on the monarch's face on a coin. Nobody caught on.
This
And
guy.
now I'm having the time of my life in Australia. Chilling with the Aboriginals, and I'm not gonna get killed every time I take a shit.
You just enjoyed yourself in the outback with millions.
I just want the free tan, if anything. It'd be nice.
How would you enjoy the boat ride there, or would you be suffering?
Yeah, I'd treat it like Muppet Treasure Island, just.
Really? Muppet Treasure Island? Oh, God.
Actually,
Just be there at the back with the rat water.
so let's talk about highway robbers. So sort of all sorts of these robberies existed due to sort of improvements in the road. But obviously when roads improved, sort of this sort of decrease. So obviously many people travelled in sort of horseback carriages and stuff, and obviously had money on them. But as there was no sort of banks at the start of this period, sort of the highway robbers would obviously go around on horseback. So obviously go around obviously robbing people. So
I'd like to do it like the pirate Blackbeard, or I'd just do the over dramatics to scare the crap out of people, and you never actually harm anyone. It seems a lot more fun. Would you rather be robbed by Dick Turpin, who probably will shoot you? But holy shit, that dude's on fire, give him money now, and then he just runs off with it.
I think it's dependent on what you're actually trying to steal, because I'd imagine to a degree, if you're someone who's probably higher up the highwayman chain of fun times, you know, you're going to pick specific targets to steal from, as opposed to, you know, the lower band guys, which are like, oh, whatever's on the road.
Yeah, that's true.
But sort of highway robberies, they still went into sort of the 1800s, didn't they?
They still go on now, it's just a lot more violent.
No, it goes on now. It's just called buying an iPhone.
Right, Mr. I own a...
Android, yeah. Send every single person who commits highway robbery to the Shadow Realm. No, it's a very interesting crime, to be fair, because unlike traditional sort of, you know, theft, it's a lot more exciting. There's a lot more moving components to it, because obviously if things are moving, it's a little more difficult to, you know, obviously keep them stable and secure. You know, because nowadays you wouldn't run up to a security van and start bashing the crap out of it to try and steal what was in it. No.
Sometimes I plan them when I'm in the bank, but it's normally because I'm bored.
Shall we mention the time when we tried to do that GTA 5 heist, and we had to... This is
the one where I kept crashing the helicopter.
Yeah, so this is the one. It got to a point, I think it took us 5 tries. So I was in the prison with some other person, some random person off the internet. Got into the prison, shot all the guards out, and then we rescued the bloke. I think Brock was the,
was the pilot in the plane.
The pilot for the plane, yeah. So we managed to get out, drive all the way to the airfield, got into the plane, and then I think Mike was the helicopter pilot outside the sheet.
Yeah, we literally got in completion, and then Mike, because he didn't know he had to gently land the helicopter, jumped out, died, and the helicopter blew up. So it was double failure.
So he got all the way. All he had to do
I was the sorriest man alive.
All he had to do was land the helicopter, and we would have been done. But no, this guy decided to just spin it off.
I didn't know how to land the helicopter back then, shit.
Yeah.
It's like the first time I'd ever flown one without having to jump out and commit suicide.
Like, I was the saltiest man alive. They could have produced a mine.
It was one of those, it's the fact we got all the way to the end, it was just that bit, and they're just like, oh, they won't let us have it, or...
To be fair, you weren't as salty as the guy that we were playing with who just jumped out the fucking game completely.
So obviously earlier we spoke about from the Middle Ages you had obviously kings that made all the laws and sort of enforced by nobles who did it, and then you'd have men who'd keep the peace.
Then it was the most behaved criminals in Australia.
Men would take it sort of in turns to like man the pays for a year and it's unpaid, and if he witnessed the crime he sort of raised the alarm for the human cry which you mentioned earlier. And apparently the human cry got abolished in 1827. From sort of 1663 they were sort of paid night watchmen in London, so I'm assuming they just patrol the streets, and in any crimes they would sort of go and chase the miscreants down and obviously do some good old law enforcement, and then you kind of was it in the 18th century you'd sort of had certain towns, you know, I think just it would expand sort of outside of London, or sort of having your night watchmen patrol your streets, and then in sort of 1749 you had the London magistrate called Henry Fielding who formed a movement called the Bow Street Runners, whose obviously prime objective was to catch these criminals, and they got their name after sort of his office in sort of Bow Street. That sort of started in 1749, and then sort of by 1798 you had sort of the River Police. About 1829 you had sort of a police force. So there wasn't the first sort of recognised ish one, was formed in 1829 by a chap called Sir Robert Peel, who sort of made this force, and policemen at the time were called bobbies, which is where it gets its name, or peelers, which was directly sort of after him, and apparently they were called coppers, sort of using the old English word cop meaning sort of grab or seize hold of. So if you hear someone shouting oi coppers, that's apparently where it comes from. Sort of the first sort of policemen we had were apparently not armed with guns, but they instead carried truncheons and rattles. And from 1880s they sort of carried sort of whistles, and apparently they wore top hats as well, which was sort of got later replaced by helmets to sort of next to the head, someone obviously chucks something at them. And by the 1835 sort of local governments in England were sort of reformed. Sort of all boroughs sort of across the country, I think, were sort of compelled to have sort of their own police forces.
pineapple on pizza, instant death.
Oh wow, okay.
I agree with that.
I kid.
People who compare things to way worse things, like, people who eat meat, comparing those individuals to Nazis in the Holocaust, I think that's a bit of a fucking stretch.
Okay.
I'm gonna
His name is the vegan.
Oh, that's fair.
Punishment should be a hot dog.
Wow.
They have to eat it in a really embarrassing way. Like a camera's over a guy's shoulders while he's holding it right by his crotch.
Look, I'm sure Peter is thankful for the business, but that person on their knees with that hot dog is just putting a hat on a hat.
They have to give eye contact to the camera as well.
My problem would be people who put their hands down their trousers in public to touch certain kinds of area in public in front of you. And my thingy for that would be, as people that, if you get fined for littering, you have to pay, was it 75 quid? I think the fine for that should be like 200 quid plus. Just straight up. I've seen people doing it and I think it's disgusting. Like,
that is gross. I've seen people do it in like the fruit and veg section in shops before.
Oh, God. Actual serious one is people who make false accusations when it comes to certain crimes. I think they should get the punishment that the person who got accused would have gotten if they'd been found guilty. Well, obviously, do your proper research to obviously make sure you're not, falsely imprisoning people who don't actually deserve to be there as well.
People have man buns and face.
I knew this was coming.
Tell us more.
I just think that should be banned. That they should be the ones who get put in a catapult and launched out the sea. I think that's how you deal with that. There's that really good meme where it's like having a man bun and vaping in public, but sucking dick is illegal on the street.
I don't think you can necessarily prevent people from living lives of crime. People, do crime for all sorts of reasons. People shoplift because some people get a thrill, some people do it literally to survive. Some people join gangs literally so they don't get threatened on their own doorstep. Some people join gangs literally just to do violence. Some people commit murder, completely by accident. Others do it completely on purpose. What it comes down to is when you've finished your sentence, or if you're someone who's done a crime, can you come back from the crime, and obviously can you function in society as it is? So obviously if you've got a lesser crime, it's something that's not serious, obviously it's a lot easier to do it. But if you went away for a good few years, obviously it's going to come down to have you got the right support when you come out to obviously try to prevent you from slipping back to it. But some people are just perpetually in and out of the prison system. So again, it comes down to individuals really, and how much they actually want to be a part of the society they live in.
I was thinking more from the perspective of maybe people that are born in sort of poor in privileged backgrounds. I was thinking that maybe sort of help them in sort of work and education to sort of show them that there's a different path that they can go on and they don't have to sort of follow people that are from that certain area, or you could just help them sort of getting some right level qualifications at school and helping them maybe sort of to go to university or do an apprenticeship or do something else that kind of keeps them off the streets and then sort of doing activities they want to do. And as well, probably people with addictions of sort, maybe providing support networks that they might need to go and maybe help them from doing something they might regret.
Obviously it comes down to how communities receive their individuals and how they're funded, because communities that have a lot of activities going on that allow people to take up hobbies are less likely to have crime. That's not to say they won't have crime, but if you've got hobbies like let's say cross country or boxing or taekwondo or swimming or anything sporty or even esports, it just prevents people from giving into sort of baser urges. So it's a dependent scenario. Obviously you have to fund appropriately, because if you don't fund it properly, obviously there's a lack of resources, a lack of ability to do anything, so people just don't bother turning up because they're just like, well, it's not properly funded, so why bother?
I think briefly how we could keep crime down, I think I wrote the word enough police to deter people committing crime. Help those people risking committing crimes by providing support such as education, jobs, financial support, and then provide more investment in poorer areas to sort of help people's lives that need it.
Pretty much nailed it, to be fair. I might make an argument against police numbers so much as making sure their time is used more efficiently, but obviously I'm not a member of the police, so obviously I couldn't tell you how their time is used.